I'm a filmmaker, and I'm here to talk about the intersection of technology and entertainment, the changing landscape of entertainment, how you guys are going to play a part of it. I'm going to do all that in 5 minutes. No problem. So first I want to talk about the intersection of technology and entertainment for me. And for me, that first came around like 1976, when I got probably one of the greatest gifts that I could have ever been given, which was a 2XL. Who here remembers what a 2XL is? Good. This is going to go so well. A 2XL was a terrible, terrible toy that played 8-track tapes. Who here knows what an 8-track tape is? Much better. Good. I'm not quite as old as I would have imagined. So what would happen is you would put an 8-track into a 2XL, and it would like start talking, and then you could like answer questions, and you'd press one of the 4 buttons that would then change, the 4 tracks that were on there to another one to tell you if you got it right or wrong. For me, I was enamored by this. This was the closest thing to like all you've heard about robots and technology. I mean, this was my like 2001: A Space Odyssey. This was the greatest thing I could have ever had in my life at 6 years old. And when you took that tape out and you like put in like Foreigner, and his eyes would light up while it played like Cold as Ice. Listen, I'm from West Virginia. I can play Foreigner on a 2XL. I also had a mullet and a Camaro. I'm allowed. For me, to have that type of intersection in my life was something that, for me, was so far off, was incredible at the age of 6. And that kind of, got me thinking about, the world in a very different way until I was 7. And then 7, everything's changed. Because at 7-year-old, what did I see at 7? Star Wars. Star Wars. At that moment. Dun, 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 dun. Come on, you guys know. Come on. What is it? Come on, let's hear it. Let's hear the theme song. Who's got it? You see, you want to sing Superman, but it's not Superman. It's not da 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 da. It's wrong. It's the wrong one. So I saw Star Wars, and this is one of those things that impacted me so much as a child. I'm going to show you how much it impacted me as a child. Is that this past year, as I went to go see the show on Broadway, A Good Man, that James Earl Jones was in, I went backstage and I said, "Oh my God, Mr. Jones, it's an honor to meet you. Would you do one thing for me?" And he goes, "I never do that. Not even for children. I get paid to do that. But for you, I will." And so then, I got this.
Morgan, I am your father.
Life-affirming. A life-affirming moment happened right there. As I met my true father. And then later on, the intersection of technology and entertainment, something else happened when I was about 18 years old, which was suddenly video cameras came out. Everybody could have a video camera. And the Super 8 movies that I used to shoot at my house on my dad's camera, where you couldn't really edit them together. You had to kind of shoot them in order, and you had to shoot one shot and then change the next shot, and nothing ever worked, but it was so exciting and so fun to do, and you'd blow them up and you project them in your house, and there was no sound, so you had to kind of act them out as they were going along. Suddenly now there was audio, there was like picture, and we could make even worse looking movies in video. And for me, that was a real transition, because now I could actually tell stories. I could actually edit them, doing tape-to-tape editing. You could actually start to create these brand new images. And for me, that was a great journey that then suddenly really came to fruition. Something really changed in 2000, which was the democratization of cinema. Because now suddenly these little handheld cameras, the cameras that you and I could buy, were now suddenly of a good enough quality where you could blow it up to 35 millimeter, and it would look just as good as a film print. A little scratchy, maybe 16 millimeter it looked like. Have it a little edge, had a little fringe to it. But you still now, anyone with a camera and a computer and a good idea could make a movie. The democratization of cinema. It was that enabled me to make my first film. When I made Super Size Me, it enabled me to make this film that we made for $65,000, that we took to Sundance, that we sold all around the world. That literally it was because suddenly I had access to something nobody else had access to, or that most people didn't have access to for so long. Usually you want to make a movie, it was so expensive to get a 35 millimeter camera, so expensive to get a 16 millimeter camera, and now anyone could do it. And now what we're looking at is a brand new change that's happening, which is the democratization of distribution. What's happening right now is now anyone with a camera and a computer and a good idea can make a film, and now anyone with a camera and a computer has a means for distribution, which is fantastic, because now there's so many more people who have the ability to make movies, so many more people who have the ability to make bad movies, so many more people that have the ability to show you how many interesting ways they can kick someone in the nuts There's so many possibilities of what's happening on the internet right now. But what I think is the most exciting is now anyone can actually put a movie out to the public. Anyone can get distribution and anyone can find an audience.